Good morning, and to our friends joining us abroad, good evening. Welcome to Mirage Talks. Today's topic, the fundable startup, how disruptive companies attract capital. We welcome startup builder, Mr. Fred Haney. And as a special treat, we will be giving away 10 copies of Fred Haney's book, Fundable Startup. Please click the link in the chat box with your mailing address, and we will be sure to get you a copy. So let's get started.
Good to go?
Good to go.
Thank you, Christy. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm always happy to talk about startup companies. That's really been my life for a long time. I know a little bit about the good things that the Mirage Institute does, so I'm happy to be a participant, and especially happy to have some long-range participants here. Thank you for joining. I'll do a screen share to begin talking about the fundable startup. Everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. So the Fundable Startup is a book I wrote. I published it in 2018. I probably worked on it for about 5 years before that. And it's about raising capital for mostly high-tech startup companies. And you might ask, well, why would somebody write a book about that? And I had some very specific reasons for doing it. When you start out to write a book, you think, well, where do I fit with respect to the competition? What is the competition? What other books are out there? Who were they written by? And I felt that I was in a very unique position because I'd been involved with startup companies from 4 very different perspectives. In my early corporate career, I was a strategic planning executive at Xerox, Computer Sciences, and TRW. And in all of those assignments, I was really acting like a venture capitalist within a large corporation. So I was helping start and strategically guide small businesses inside Xerox, Computer Sciences, and TRW. I actually sold 2 divisions of TRW, so you get to know businesses pretty well when you sell them like that. Then I got recruited by 3i Group, which is the largest venture capital company in the world. It's a British banking consortium headquartered in London. They recruited me in the early 80s to set up and run a high-tech venture capital fund here in Southern California. So I did that for almost 10 years. It was very successful. We invested in 60 companies and produced 20 IPOs, 20 acquisitions, and 20 dead companies, basically. And then after that, I got involved with, as a co-founder of the Tech Coast Angels, which is the largest angel investment group in the country. And then since about 2000, I've been a co-founder of half a dozen startup companies. And through all that, I've run this organization called Monday Club, which is a mentoring organization that helps a couple companies every month improve their pitch decks and improve their chances of getting funded. So I thought, well, there aren't very many authors who have come at high-tech startup companies from all those different perspectives, and maybe that's something I can capitalize on. So here's a quick summary of the book. One of the most important ideas is, look, if you're approaching investors, especially if you're approaching venture capital investors, they've got a lot of deals to choose from. They see a lot of opportunities, they see a lot of good opportunities, some really good ideas, and some companies that have really strong management teams. So the first thing a startup has to realize when it goes out to raise money is it's competing against a lot of companies that it can't see. I mean, you never see who your competition is, but it's a competition. And part of the message is that the venture capitalists have their pick of management teams for these companies. I mean, they can go with the management team they think has the best chance of being successful. And you have to realize there's a lot of experience. It takes 15 to 20 years to become a really seasoned CEO. So part of what I'm trying to do is kind of dispel this idea that you can get a good idea in the laboratory and run out and be the CEO of a startup company and expect to be successful at raising capital. We see that happen all the time. People try it, and of course, those are when it works, those are the Steve Jobs, Bill Gates stories. But it's a pretty long shot. So one of the messages of the book is you got to do everything you can to build a really strong management team as you go out to try and raise capital. The other thing, nobody's going to have the best management team, but there are other things you can do to kind of make up for a little weakness here and there. And those are things like get a lot of market traction, which takes a lot of risk out of your investment situation. It proves to investors that you can do what you say you're going to do. Reduces the risk a lot and gives them some comfort that you might be successful at what you're trying to do. So it's competition. Competition is just one of the most important messages. And it may sound trite, but a lot of companies never think about it that way. A lot of startups never think about it that way. The mentality of a lot of startup companies is, I've got the best idea ever. People are going to beat a path to my doorstep to invest in this thing. I don't even have to sell it. All I have to do is put it out there and let people come. And it just doesn't work that way. Certainly not with the venture capitalists. So you're competing for capital, and you just can never forget that. If you try and put yourself in the mind of a venture capitalist, it really helps to try and understand where they're coming from. Venture capitalists are managing other people's money. The way the venture capital industry works is if a few people get together, they form a venture capital partnership. They become the managing partners of the partnership. They're usually fairly small, 2, 3, 4, possibly members, and then they raise capital from people who are called the general partners. Now, these are often institutional investors, corporation, high net worth people, and they're putting in sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars for these managing partners to manage. So the managing partners, the venture capitalists themselves, are managing other people's money. So they're kind of risk averse. They're not going to do anything on a lark. They're not going to do anything silly. Also, they see a lot of deals. They see hundreds of deals, some of them every month. So they've got their pick of good deals. What they're looking for is really unique, disruptive ideas that have the potential to be a home run kind of investment. I don't think they're always looking for unicorn type investments, but the venture capitalists have a really good track record at cherry picking good deals. I've had a lot of people say to me, well, venture capital is kind of irrelevant. They only do 1 or 2% of the deals that are out there. Well, that's true. It's somewhere around 1 or 2%. But the other thing you want to be aware of is that they're involved in about 1/3 of the IPOs. The high-tech companies that go public, the VCs are in about 1/3 of those. So they're doing something right. They may invest in a small percentage, but they're hitting the good ones. They're doing a good job of cherry picking the winners. So good idea to try and put yourself in the mind of the venture capitalist and understand how they're thinking about what they do. Like I said, they see a lot of deals. I mean, the average VC has a 25, 50 business plans on his desk. I mean, they've got lots of opportunity. Like we said, they do a small percentage of all the startup companies that are out there, but they're in about a third of the companies that go public. So they're doing a good job of cherry picking the ones that have good ideas and good management teams. So what's a good idea? I mean, in the framework of the book, what's a fundable idea? A fundable startup, in my jargon here, consists of a fundable idea and a fundable management team. So first off, what's a fundable idea? Well, the left here part of the chart refers to growth opportunity. A fundable idea addresses a really important problem for somebody. That somebody becomes the customer, but it has to solve a problem, the kind of problem that is keeping somebody awake at 2 o'clock in the morning. You know, gee, I wish I had a solution to this problem. And it has to address a pretty big market opportunity in terms of dollar opportunity. And it's got to have a lot of growth opportunity, but also a lot of future, because what happens here is the venture capitalists work with these companies for 5 or 10 years, and then they take them public. But when they take them public, the people who are buying on the public offering have to believe that the company has 10 years or more of future, or they wouldn't buy on the public offering. So these companies have to have a convincing future. And then the other thing, and we'll talk about it some more, the VCs know that in order to be successful with a company, they have to have a management team that can execute. They need a management team, and their preference, frankly, is to invest in management teams that have done it before. Maybe not as a team, but the individuals have some track record, some success. You look at their bios, they've got some good success. So the subtitle of the book is How Disruptive Companies Attract Capital. And to me, that's a very important concept. I don't like the idea of companies get an idea, write down a business plan, and go knock on every door they can find to knock on. You know, look for every investor, knock on every venture capital door, send it to every VC, send it to every angel. I don't think that's the efficient way to go about it. The ideal would be if you could create not just a business plan, but a whole situation, maybe even an initial product, a management team, a business plan, answers to all the hard questions. If you can put together a really good story, then you can attract capital. The money will come to you. That sounds weird, but it does happen. I mean, think about it this way. The VCs are in the business of looking for good deals. So they're not going to turn down an opportunity if they see something or learn about something that's really sounds like a great opportunity. They'll go chase it down. Then they do this all the time. They go, the really top tier VCs, guys like Sequoia Capital and Kleiner Perkins and Institutional Venture Partners, New Enterprise, those guys, if they get an idea that a really super experienced CEO from the past has a new idea and is going to form a new company, they'll go chase him down and help him put it together. That happens a lot. So you'd like to be in a position to attract capital, rather than just having to go out and chase it all the time. So the investor thought process, excuse me, I'm going to take a sip once in a while here to keep my my voice calmed down. I'm glad to be interactive, by the way. If somebody has a question, you feel free to jump in. The venture capital process is by necessity kind of a negative process. One of the things I learned very early on when I got in the venture capital business, I would see something, I'd get excited about it. I'd spend a couple of weeks learning about it, digging in. And I finally figured out you can't afford to do that. You just can't get excited about every good idea that comes along. And then you spend weeks and weeks and you end up saying no after all, and it's been a month and everybody's frustrated and you missed a couple good deals along the way. So the process has to work the other way around. The venture capital thought process is a negative process. If I'm going to say no, I want to say no fast. I mean, with my venture capital, with 3i Ventures, the venture capital fund I was managing, our little joke was, we want to say no right away to all the deals we're not going to do, and yes to all the deals that we are going to do. So the challenge is, how do you quickly separate the wheat from the chaff? And so what the VCs do is, they listen to the presentation, they get the idea. As they listen, they make a list of all the things that they might be concerned about. They're looking for the negatives. They're looking for, if this company is going to fail, what would cause it to fail? And then they make a list, maybe 5, 10, 20, 50 things that they're concerned about. And then the due diligence process, if they decide to proceed with a due diligence process, that process is to take each of those issues and kind of work it, either find a resolution for it, find a way around it, or learn to live with it. And so they go through their list, and they're trying to check off every one and say, well, I can either fix it, or I can live with it, or I can work around it. And then once they've been through that process, they can get closer to a yes or no. I mean, if they can get comfortable that they can handle all the issues, then they might go ahead and make an investment. But if there's some showstoppers that they just don't think they can resolve, that's when they would say no. And there's a lot of, because they have such a time management problem, they got always hundreds of people trying to get them on the phone, hundreds of people trying to schedule meetings with them. They've got all these business plans on their desk. They're on 10 boards of directors. So they've got a real serious management issue, time management issue. It's really behooves them to, if they're going to say no, to say no just as quickly as possible and get on to the next project. This is something that a lot of people probably don't understand. Everybody thinks their company is worth a lot. It's kind of a simple point. But two companies can be identical. And if investors buy the story and actually put money into the company, then it has value. But if investors don't put money into it, it really has no value. I mean, the value is only value if there's potential to realize it. Kind of a simple point, but one that a lot of people don't realize. I mean, this becomes a part of the thought process when you negotiate. I mean, companies can say, well, yeah, we think our company's worth this much. But unless the other side, unless the investors agree with that, your company doesn't really have any value. Another thing that motivated me to write this book was a thing called Steve Jobs' Law. It was quoted in an article in The Atlantic in September of 2011. Steve Jobs' Law says founders make the best CEOs. Well, that's not been my experience. In my experience, an awful lot of startup company founders are scientific people or technical people, inventive people who get an idea and then make themselves the CEO of a startup company. In my experience at 3i, I managed this portfolio of 60 investments, but I also was directly involved in a dozen investments. And out of those dozen investments, I had to replace 7 CEOs. A couple of them more than once. And the scenario was kind of the same. I would go to the non-management members of the board of directors and say, doesn't seem like the CEO is getting things done here. I mean, we're not meeting our objectives. We're not doing what we said we were going to do. Is anybody else concerned about that? And all the other hands would go up, and we would form a search committee and go out and decide to go out and find a new CEO. So 7 out of 12 companies, I had to do that. Guys like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, no question, they're fantastic CEOs. But I think they're the exception. To me, they are the exception and not the rule. In the early 1980s, I told you I sold a division of TRW. I sold a division of they manufactured digital telephone equipment, not the digital switching systems, but the boxes that go between the telephone and the digital switching systems. And I sold that company to California Microwave. At that time, California Microwave was about $100 million company. And its CEO was also its founder. So he had taken it from 0 up to 100 million, but he was the only CEO in California who had taken a company from startup up to the level of $100 million. There was only one in California, and that was that guy. And I'm sorry, I'm not remembering his name right now. The company's California Microwave. So I think that most VCs would take issue with this too. I mean, they see the problems with founder CEOs. So it's an important thought process to go through. Just because you invented something and got a good idea doesn't mean you're the right person to run the company.
Fred?
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
How can you tell if you're a good CEO or not? I mean, if I was a manager or maybe a VP or something, CEO is something different. How can you tell? How can I tell?
Well, there are a lot of different answers, I guess. I mean, what the VCs like to see is a resume that shows that someone has been successful before as a CEO. Most CEOs have gone through the kind of process that we show here, the stair step. You know, they've built their career one step at a time. They've climbed a lot of rungs on the ladder. On the other hand, to answer your question, I don't think you necessarily have to have been a CEO in the past to prove that that you can be a CEO. There's a case study in my book, and if you end up with one of the books, be sure to go read this case study. It's about Lori Torres, and try and get the timing right. I think I interviewed Lori in about 2015. Remember, the book was published in 2018. And I had been involved with Lori in the early days of her company. She had an idea to build a kiosk that would go into the lobby of a big apartment complex. And it would be a place to store packages so the package delivery services, UPS and FedEx and people like that, instead of throwing packages on the floor and letting everybody sort it out, they would put the package in a cubbyhole in the kiosk, and it would send the recipient a code. It says, hey, you got a package in box number 7, and here's the code to go retrieve it. Really good idea at the time. And I helped Lori present to my Monday Club, which is a group that reviews 2 business plans every month. It was with the idea of trying to help people improve their messaging. And I wrote a case study about Lori as a first-time CEO that I thought had a pretty good chance of being successful. And the reason was that she had about 15 years of really good management experience. It was property management experience with the Irvine Company, which is a huge property owner in Orange County. But she'd been hiring and firing and organizing and strategizing and doing all the things that a top-level manager has to do. She didn't have the title CEO, but she had a lot of really good management experience. And one of the reasons I bring this story up is that about 5 years after the book was published, let's see, not quite 5, I think around 2021, Lori sold her company for over $100 million. So I got it right on that one. But I hope that helps answer the question. You know, and one mistake I see some founders make is they actually underplay their management experience. I mean, I'll see a pitch deck that says, well, I managed this and this organization for ABC Corporation. And when I start to talk to them and say, well, what did you do? What were your responsibilities? How many people did you manage? What did you accomplish? How long did you do that? I learned that they actually have pretty good experience, that may be enough to impress a VC that they would know how to get the job done. So in that case, I end up encouraging people to develop, spend a couple slides, you know, write a book about it, really lay it out there for people to see that you do have this good experience. So I hope I've at least touched on an answer to your question. How are we doing?
Oh, yes, indeed. Thank you so much for your insights. I really appreciate it.
May I ask another question, please?
Sure.
I did agree with you completely. A person who has technological skill is not necessarily have the CEO skills. In my case, I was hoping when I was approaching VCs to get their assistance in recruiting the right manager for me. Is this a possibility they will consider?
Boy, that I like your thought process. I think that they have done that. I mean, if you go to them and say, I'm probably not the person to run this company, but I'd like your help in recruiting a CEO. They might appreciate that. The problem is That takes a lot of their time. It's a very time-consuming process for the VCs to get that involved. So a better approach, I mean, I'm going to refer again to a case study in the Fundable Startup. I helped start a company called Novodyne Therapeutics. It was a vaccine for Candida and staph infections. And in that case, I was working with really strong technical people. These were infectious diseases experts from the Los Angeles Biomedical Research Institute. And I played the role initially of the CEO. I mean, I didn't have that title. I didn't need the title, but I helped figure out what the strategy was going to be. I helped put the business plan together. I took the company out to introduce them to some venture capital firms, and we got a commitment from Domain Associates, who are one of the best biotech venture capital funds. Commitment for, I forget the number, 12 or 13 million, I think, something like that. And my deal with them was, look, I'm not the person to run this company, but once we get some money in the bank, I'll work with you to go to Korn Ferry and we'll recruit a CEO. So that's a little bit like what you're suggesting, but instead of having the VCs invest their time and energy to do that, I did it. So that might be something to think about in your case. You might try and find somebody who could act as an interim kind of CEO, somebody that would impress the VCs, but on an interim basis with the idea that once you make a deal, you're going to go out and recruit a more appropriate CEO. Does that give you something to think about? This sort of addresses the question. I just think a lot of people underestimate what's involved in being a CEO. Most CEOs spend 15 to 20 years becoming experienced CEOs. And it's really hard to compress that learning process. Also, if you do look at the statistics, most CEOs are over 45 years old. So it's not something that just happens. It's plus a certain amount of experience and maturity are just part of the portfolio. Important part of what you need to have. So we talked about the Novodyne case study and the Parcel Pending case study. The DRC case study is on this same topic in a way. DRC Computer was invented by a really bright technical guy, one of the smartest technical people I've been around, and he had some ideas for merging hardware and software in a way that you could build a computer that could actually re-architect itself on the fly. So, I mean, what does that mean? It's hard to think about. But if you're computing along and the software said, I'd really like to be able to do 1,000 things in parallel in hardware right now. The system could do that. It was using field programmable gate arrays, which are programmable, sort of hardware, basically. So he had a way of building a very, very flexible, reprogrammable computer. And he ran the company himself for 5 or 6 years, got a couple contracts, had maybe 10 employees. And he kept trying to raise, he approached venture capitalists and just never got to first base. He asked me to come on his board. This was after I left 3i, and I did join his board. And I knew what was happening. The VCs were not going to tell him that he wasn't fundable. They were going to say, it's too early for us. It's not quite the kind of thing we do. Keep us posted. But what they weren't going to say was, we just don't have enough management experience and we're not going to back you as the CEO for this company. When the dot-com bubble burst around 2000, this company crashed. And I went to him and said, Steve, you got a really good idea here. I think we can build a company, but we're going to have to bring in a fundable CEO. And we brought in a guy who had been the operations VP at the Tandem Computers up in Silicon Valley. And sure enough, we raised $7 million and built a company and sold it. Ended up in 2013, I think, their computer was the most powerful gene sequencing computer in the world. So I guess it's an important message. The VCs will never tell you you're not qualified. You're not the CEO. They'll never say that. They don't want to make you mad. They want to have a relationship with you. They want to be around in case you're successful and need some more money later. So they're just not going to tell you the bad news. So you have to kind of read between the lines sometimes. There's yet another dimension to being a CEO. And that is, there are some, what I call company building skills involved in, I'm sorry about my voice. It just gets a little tired when they talk too much. The company building skills are specific to startups. And this is things like knowing how to incorporate a company, knowing how to use a stock to build a team, starting with a blank piece of paper to write a business plan, creating some initial value, going out and getting first customers. Those aren't necessarily skills you learn as the CEO of IBM. A lot of companies, startups make the mistake of thinking that if they bring in a CEO from a large company or a division manager or some senior executive, that they'll have it covered. But that's not necessarily true, because those guys are used to having big staffs around them and a lot of people to help make decisions. And they're not necessarily light on their feet and good at solving some of these problems, where you really have to start from scratch and be very inventive. So it's important to understand that that distinction. People in the large companies don't necessarily have the skill set that's required to build a successful startup. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide. It's just some important ingredients. I did an interesting little word study one time. Entrepreneurship and startup companies and CEOs and markets are words that are highly interrelated and intertwined. And I wish that there was a little different emphasis sometimes when we talk about entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial training. So I did a word study. I got all the articles I could find on the following topics: successful CEOs, successful entrepreneurs, and successful startup companies. And the word that appeared the most in the successful entrepreneurs articles was passion. The word that appeared most in the successful CEOs articles was management. And the word that appeared most in the successful startup companies article was markets. And I thought it was really interesting. I mean, the different emphasis there. I've been around. I've been on the advisory board for the Greif Center at USC. USC's entrepreneurial center since 1984, and I love what they do. They do a good job. But I've always thought they kind of overemphasized passion, determination, motivation, those kinds of things, at the expense of learning how to manage. I wish they spent a little more time teaching people what management means. I mean, they can't take a 20-something MBA student and turn them into an experienced manager, but they can at least bring up the issues and have them understand. So I think all of those, obviously, all those things are important. I mean, you got to manage, you need the passion. Sometimes a good combination is an entrepreneur founder with a experienced CEO. If you can find the right partner, and that's what we did with my DRC computer company. We found a good partner for the founder. But you need all those things working together. You need management, you need passion, and you need to understand markets and have effective market strategy. So one of the things you can do here, regardless of how strong your management team is, one of the things you can do is pursue a bootstrapping strategy. Which means you try to develop a first product, you go out and get some customers, you prove that people will buy it, you prove they'll buy it again, prove that it works, you prove that the price is okay, you prove you can manufacture it for what you said you could manufacture. You can do those kinds of things, and not every company can. I mean, some companies just can't do that without significant capital. But if you can do those things, it goes a long way to cover up for any weaknesses in your management team or your management configuration, because it reduces risk. VCs are looking at risk. They don't want risk of, will the product work? They don't want the risk of, will customer buy it? They don't want the risk of, can we make it for what we say we can make it for? They don't want the risk of, will there be repeat sales? They don't want the risk of, can we support it? So if you can take those risks out, then the only real remaining risk is, can we scale this thing up into a big national, international corporation? That's great. I mean, that works fine for the VC. So bootstrapping can be a sort of alternative to going out and hiring an experienced CEO. Startups always have advisors, and I think one of the biggest problems that startup companies have is that there's too many advisors. And it's really hard to know, who should I talk to? Do I go to an incubator? I'm not a big fan of incubators, by the way. I mean, you'll see that in the book. This is probably overgeneralizing, but the thing that's keeping a lot of companies from getting capital is the CEO doesn't have enough experience. So I don't care how many incubators you go to, if you still got the same CEO, you're still not going to raise more money. The incubators probably may not be solving the problem that you really have to solve. And the problem is that startups are just inundated with offers from incubators and different kinds of advisors, sometimes money finders, bankers. And the point I'm just trying to make here is that broad experience is better. You know, a lot of companies go with an advisor because he's had one or two startup companies be successful. That's really not a lot of experience. I mean, and it's experience with a specific product and market situation and a specific market time in space. But there are advisors who have been involved with so many companies that every time they see a situation, they look out and they say, well, I've been here before. I know what happens or what can happen here. I sort of know how to deal with this. Not that it's identical, but close enough. So I've been here before. And that's the point of the big pile of companies on the right. There are advisors who have very broad experience, have been with a lot of companies in a lot of different situations. And the closer you can get to that kind of advisory help, I think the healthier you'll be. I'll talk a little about crowdfunding. It's a fairly new thing. I'm sure you all have followed it and know about it. I'm not a real fan of crowdfunding, but simply because having been a venture capitalist for 10 years, I know how hard it is to sort out these startup companies and figure out which ones are going to be the winners and which one are going to be the losers. It's hard to do the due diligence. The VCs have a lot of tools. They have a lot of help. They have a lot of experience. It's hard to do enough reference checking on management to find out if they're how strong they really are. And I don't like the idea of delegating that to somebody else. So I just wonder how much good due diligence the crowdfunders are doing. I keep asking for data on crowdfunding. You know, have we seen any results? And the answer is we really haven't. A couple of the crowdfunding sites put up pretty good return on investment numbers, but they're based on unrealized profits. You have to go on the basis of profits that have actually been realized. There was an article in the news today about a real estate crowdfunder that got in a lot of trouble. Lost a lot of money and is having to their investors are taking some big losses. That's a little different than the high-tech startup. So I'm not a big fan of crowdfunding. My guess is that when the statistics start to come in, their returns will be somewhat lower than the top tier venture capital funds. I'd be surprised if the averages are much higher than 12 or 15% or something like that. And you can almost do that in the stock market if you're smart about it. So that's my pitch. So glad to answer questions if we have time, Christy.
We absolutely do have time, so you can either unmute yourself and ask Fred directly or send to the message board.
Who's got a question?
It's okay to talk, or I have to type?
Yeah,
No, please talk.
Oh, thanks. So my question is about the valuation of the company worth. When you're in a very early stage, so you actually got nothing but predictions. And of course, as a CEO, my predictions are awesome. And I'm not sure if the valuation are so awesome. So I would like to get some insight about it too.
There is a section in the fundable startup that addresses this issue. And it's a great question. It's an important one. there's a method for estimating the valuation of a company based on future projections. And it's called discounted cash flow, net present value calculation. There are different ways to refer to it. But the simple idea is that you do your best to estimate revenues, profits, cash flows year by year by year for at least 5 years. And then you also estimate what the value of the company might be at the end of 5 years. And then you discount all those things back. Technical term, but basically means you figure out what most investors use a discount rate that's like 60 or 70%. So you say, well, if I expect to make 60% on my money, given those cash flows and that value at the end of 5 years, what would the company be worth today? And it's a really interesting little exercise because most companies say, well, we're going to have $50 to $100 million in revenue. We're going to have 15 or 20% profits. We don't have to build a factory, so we don't have a lot of negative cash flow. But it'll take a few years before we have positive cash flow. And then at the end, maybe we're doing 20% profits and it looks like we're worth 25 times earnings or something like that. And you discount all that back. And the answer is almost always in the $2 to $4 million range. I mean, that sounds silly, but it just is. That's just how it works. I mean, that's just how the numbers work. So the best thing.
I just want to, sorry for the interruption, but you're saying that I need to calculate 5 years forward. So that's thing that I can do with, I mean, I will do the best. Okay, so I'll do it. And now the worst today, what it has to do with the cash flow I have in 5 years in the future?
I'm not sure I'm understanding.
I'm saying that I can maybe predict, or I can do my best to predict what will be the cash of the company in 5 years to the future. But today I want to know how to evaluate the worth of the company. So I know what I can do, but I still didn't understand how to estimate the value today.
It's going to be hard for me to spell out the calculation. So look, do a Google and look up discounted cash flow calculation or net present value calculation. The point is that the value today, the best you can do, and this has been shown to be the best way of valuing a company, the value today is based on the cash flows that you can generate next year. You know, 5 years is kind of arbitrary. Some companies it would be 7 or 8 or 10, but the best estimate of the value today is to discount the value of the cash flows for the next 5 years and include an estimate for the value of the company at the end of 5 years. I know that sounds circular, but it's not. I mean, it's really not. The problem with all that is people say, well, I don't know, should I be aggressive? Should I be conservative? And the answer is you should be right. Just you have to sharpen your pencil and make the best calculation you can. You don't want to fudge it either way, you know, aggressive or conservative. You just want to make the best calculation that you possibly can, and it works. So to give maybe an example of what's happening. If I want to make 50% return on my money, and I think your company is going to be worth, your cash flow is worth 150 million next year. What would I be willing to pay for it today?
In a worse of 100.
100, right. So that's the idea. See, that's the idea of it.
Okay,
there
I think I
are,
got it.
There's actually formulas, like in an Excel spreadsheet, there's a formula for calculating discounted cash flow. You give it a stream of cash flows and a terminal value and a discount rate, and it turns a crank and gives you a number. There's just not a better way of estimating the value. That's what the VCs are doing, basically. The good ones, the top tier ones, that's what they're doing. And it's a good discipline because it forces you to document your assumptions and really think through, why do I think I can achieve that revenue level? How do I know those expenses will produce that level of business? The tendency is to over project revenue and under project expenses. It's always harder to get revenue than you think it's going to be. And on the expense side, expenses always pop up that you didn't anticipate. I mean, you just can't think of everything that has to happen. So it's a good idea to be a little conservative with your revenue projections and put a little padding in on the expense projections. But that method, again, there's a section in the Fundable Startup about this process. But there's also a lot of articles online. I mean, again, if you Google net present value calculation or discounted cash flow method for valuing the company, you'll get plenty of help.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure. Other questions?
Okay, well, on that note, on behalf of Paul and Michelle Mirage and the Mirage Institute, Fred, thank you so much for taking the time today to enlighten our Mirage tribe. And everyone, thank you for joining us. And if you wanted a copy of the book, I just resent the email. Just email your name and mailing address, and we will get a copy out to you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Good evening.
Thank you.